Well, a very big welcome today to the Buddhist Society, and we're going to be talking about Buddhism and the environment. Today's date is the 4th of June, but tomorrow, the 5th of June, is World Environment Day. So we're not actually spot on the day, but frankly, any day when we're prepared to talk about the environment is a good day. So, you know, this talk actually had its origins last year when many environmental concerns came to the fore, particularly the forest fires down in Australia and all sorts of appalling things, which I think really shocked the world. And during this long enforced retreat, I think many people have actually had to think about the things that really matter, the things that are really important, and the changes we'd like to make and would like to move towards, a new world we'd like to move towards in the event of us surviving this pandemic. And in order to do that, we have a group of really wonderful speakers this afternoon: Geshe Namdak, Venerable Sucitto, and Colin Ash. And I'll just read a little bit out about them. Venerable Geshe Tenzin Namdak first worked as an environmental researcher, having graduated in hydrology. Hydrology, being from Holland, hydrology is one of probably the most important discipline you can have in a country that would be underwater were it not for the management of the dams and the dikes and so on. And he started studying Buddhism at Maitreya Institute in the Netherlands in 1993, and he took ordination from His Holiness the Dalai Lama before engaging in his formal studies in Buddhist philosophy and psychology at Serajay Monastic University in South India in 1997. And he completed the entire 20-year Geshe program at Serajay in 2017 and the traditional one-year Vajrayana study program at Gyume Tantric College in 2019. And he's the first Westerner ever to have done so. And currently he's the resident teacher at Jamyang Buddhist Center, London, and teaches also at other centers in Europe and India. And you'll find the email address of Jamyang on the web, easily accessible on your website. And they have regular classes and teachings, so do attend. Ajahn Sucitto is a long-term friend of the Buddhist Society, known him for many decades, and he's known by most people who are adherents of Buddhism in England. He was born in 1949. Ajahn Sucitto entered monastic life in Thailand in 1975, and he subsequently took bhikkhu ordination there in 1976. But he returned to Britain in 1978 to train under Venerable Ajahn Sumedho in the lineage of the Thai forest master Venerable Ajahn Chah, very distinguished and world-famous teacher. In 1979, Ajahn Sucitto was part of the group that established Chittavevika, Chithurst Forest Monastery in West Sussex, and he's lived there for the greater part of his monastic life. But he travels on teachings engagements throughout the world. His book, Buddha Nature, Human Nature, is available as a free download, and you can get it on our website. And our final speaker is Colin Ash, who is a senior visiting research fellow in economics at the University of Reading. And Buddhist economics is one of his current research interests. He's a long-term member of the Buddhist Society, was a member of the Buddhist Society Council for a long time, and he's led basic meditation class here at the Buddhist Society for decades. He's also is a Buddhist prison chaplain, and for many years he served as chair of the English Sangha Trust. So he's has a foot in both camps. He's a proper professional economist and also a practicing Buddhist. We don't want to spend too much time with those introductions. Now we've got those out of the way. Now the structure of today's meeting is that there'll be a half-an-hour talk, then there'll be a little break, and then there'll be another half-an-hour talk and another short break. Then our final speaker, Colin Ash, will come on. Then after that, there'll be a short break again. And during that time, you can make a cup of tea or go to the loo or whatever, stretch your legs. But during the talks, please send in your questions. You'll see at the bottom down there, there's a little chat window, chat icon. and you can click on that and then you type in your question. All those questions will be collected together, and at the last session of the afternoon there'll be the panel, and you can address your questions either to the entire panel or to individual speakers. So we're going to start without further ado with our first speaker, Geshe Namdak, and it's the Interdependence of Altruism. So thank you so much, Venerable Namdak. Thank you so much for coming. Looking forward to your talk.
Yeah, welcome to everybody. As Desmond just said, that I started as a researcher in the form of having studied hydrology. So I was involved in a few researches from the government, and actually one was also in relation with climate change from the point of view of the sea level, the rising of the sea level. So I was involved in a few calculations of one of those projects. But yeah, today I won't talk about the scientific aspects of climate change because I've been asked to deliver a kind of talk with regard to the Buddhist point of view in regarding to climate change or environment problems in general. So I made a few slides, so I will go to the slides while explaining these points. And then from a scientific point of view, of course, we have the evidence of the proof of different aspects of environmental problems. But today I won't address those issues. I will go into more aspects of mind training. From the point of view, we have to change our attitude, right? So attitude changing of an personal, social, and kind of interconnected global level. Yeah, we have to change a lot of attitudes in order to change the world. Yeah, so from that point of view, I made a few slides, and according to those slides, I will give some explanation about the Buddhist point of view of environmental problems. So you see there, the Buddha, of course, 2,500 years ago, already was aware about the different problems we have as human beings, as well as the problems in our surroundings, right? So the Buddha also explained that all our problems we have on an individual level, on a social level, and on a global level, basically are rooted in states of mind, rooted in what we call destructive emotions or afflictions. And then, you see the world and the sprout coming up, so that refers to, the interconnectedness of the world and its environment. And there's also a picture of a brain. So we Buddhists, we mainly focus upon mental consciousness or the development of consciousness, so to say. But to make that kind of evident in the picture, then we have to think. In order to change our habits, in order to change the world, we have to contemplate. There's need for dialogues, there's need for inner change. So that's actually right. So then altruism, generally speaking, is defined in most dictionaries as a selfless concern for the well-being of others. And interdependence is kind of, there's many levels of interdependence, but from the point of the presentation today, interdependence depends upon humans, interdependent upon themselves, as well as their relation with the environment. So that is very evident for most of us. That is easy to see that relationship. And then why is altruism so important? Because many of environmental issues are also rooted in kind of a self-concern, either on a social level or on a global level or a national level, so to say. So thinking about certain aspects of life being more important than others. So that's why I choose this kind of title, and also choose the title of the Interdependence of Altruism. So that if we change the mind going towards more selfless concern, so to say, to think about others from the point of view environment, then it has a certain effect. So there's also the interdependence is right there. So then, as we have seen in the last, as Desmond just said in the introduction, with the epidemic of the coronavirus, then we saw that initially for a government to act takes time. So we have to depend on scientific evidence, then we have to make decisions between an economic kind of aspect of society, as well as health aspects of society. And sometimes, as you know, sometimes we don't like to believe something is happening. It happened to me also when I was in retreats in Eastern Nepal. for a few weeks, I didn't follow the news, and then coming out of retreat, seeing this incredible change in the world, you know. So initially you don't like to believe that, because we, most of the time, we just grasp to this permanence of our comfort in life, and we grasp to this kind of not really wanting to believe in a different way. Yeah? So we like to see things as a permanent manner. And of course, nothing is in a permanent aspect. Our body and mind are momentarily changing, as well as the environment around us is momentarily changing. So there's an understandable aspect that people initially don't like to know about it, or don't like to act. Yeah, so that's with what we saw with the pandemic, very evident. Certain countries reacted very quickly, while other countries, they waited a little bit longer or needed more time. Yeah, so the effects of the implications of waiting or taking action directly, also we could see, right? Like Vietnam, for example, was extremely successful in dealing with the pandemic. Well, in Western countries, especially in European countries, also, yeah, there were basically a lot of countries were a little bit too late, yeah, for the lockdown to stop the spread of the virus, so to say. So yeah, there's many things to say to that, but then we can see that we need knowledge, yeah, because ignorance is one of the main problems, also for yeah, problems in our life, so to say, on the different levels. So we need to depend on scientific evidence, and we saw that while dealing with the pandemic, that all the governments, they directly depend basically for decision making on scientific evidence. So because it's very close by, they see the suffering of society direct around themselves, so they have to take action. If they don't take action, then it's going to be a bigger problem. Yeah, it looks very close by, so that makes it look more dangerous. But actually, if you think about an environmental problem like climate change, is just a bit further away, but the problems are much more severe. So that's as we just talked about, we need a kind of not only the knowledge, but also the understanding that we have to make plans, the planning for future kind of disasters to come about. Yeah, so that's has to do with not really understanding that interdependence of not only our own future, but also the future of our next generation. Yeah, so then this altruism comes also around the corner, because if you think only about your own life, if you think only about your own society, without thinking about, you know, 20, 30 years down the line, or 50 to 100 years down the line, there's a real self-centered kind of concern, which actually causes a problem, yeah, for future generations. So from that point of view, altruism is quite an, yeah, important aspect in the development of taking decisions with regards to depending on scientific evidence, to make sure we're going to a future that is less disastrous if we don't act. Yeah? So that's the kind of a little bit introduction. Then, as we know, all the things we do on a physical, on a verbal, and even on a mental level, they're actually preceded by mental attitudes. They're preceded by a particular intention, by a particular motivation. And we see that on all levels of society. Yeah, it's true in relationships, it's true in society. Yeah, that whatever we generate as an intention, the outcome of our physical and verbal behaviors will be in accordance to that. Yeah, so if you watch the news over the last few weeks, then you saw there was one case of a person who got incredibly irritated by a few youngsters talking outside his apartment. He asked them to stop with talking because that disturbed his mind, and to a certain extent he became so angry at these people. They didn't listen to stop with talking, and even decided to shoot them. You know, so that means there's a physical act based on a mental attitude. Yeah? So for us, same thing. The governments have to make decisions. In order to make decisions, they have to have the evidence of the scientific world, and on top of that, also they have this awareness. Without awareness, that's being built up by different platforms in society, right? The different groups that make sure that it's an issue to be dealt with. Then, because of those kind of understandings, they can have other kind of intentions or motivations to guide, you know, the planning of a particular aspect of economic aspects of society, as well as health aspects that are related with climate change, of course. Yeah. So this person, what I just mentioned in this case of killing other individuals, came out of anger, right? So one of the destructive emotions being classified. Yeah, but also things out of attachment like rape and other problems can arise in society. And then from the point of view of environmental issues, we also very attached to our comfort in life, right? So that also causes quite a lot of problems. If I go back to the 20 years I spent in a very simple life in a monastery in South India, and then coming to the West, just walking in the supermarkets and see what's all available and see how things are packed in plastic. And, you know, we produce so much incredible amount of garbage every human being on the planet, especially in the Western developed countries. So of course, there's a lot of good projects to recycle, but also that takes energy. So we in society became a little bit more inclined to get more desire and attachment to these kind of comforts in life. So the question is, do we need all that? You know, do we need all these kind of aspects of life? Because dealing with environmental issues, we have to deal with those issues on different levels, on a social level, and of course also on a personal level, and of course national and international level. So it also depends on the individuals, right? We need different platforms to deal with issues, to make sure that people become aware of the scientific findings of where we're going to in the future. And based on that, if a lot of people agree upon, with diet, a lot of things can be done. Habituation patterns of using transportation, etc., etc. So a lot of things can be done on an individual level as well. Yeah? And that will bring a bigger awareness or a greater awareness that will be taken over by bigger platforms on social and national and international level. So we have to start from the different angles in order to move in a particular direction. And then the destructive aspects of society are basically, as we can see, depend upon these kind of, states of mind. And there's also positive things in the news, right? The UK reporter who gives his own shoes to a person who had to walk for 200 kilometers to go back home without footwear in Maharashtra in India. So also then we can see that that positive act came about by the power of a positive mental state. So how do we generate those positive mental states? And in particular, how do we generate a kind of altruism towards other people in our society? So normally we see a drawing there of friend, enemy, and stranger, and the other drawing refers to human beings. Actually, that drawing comes from the difference between the theory of Newton and what we find in quantum physics. So I find it quite interesting because it not only amplifies the aspects or the need to generate altruism, but also interdependence. Yeah? Because normally we see people around us in society as completely different. Yeah? The friend, the enemy, and the stranger we see as existing from their own side kind of personalities. But our dearest friends can have another person who dislike our dearest friend, right? So if we classify person A, we see as a friend, but somebody else might see person A as an enemy, or somebody else have an indifferent feeling, sees it as a stranger. So it's not that those individuals in society exist from their own side, either as enemy, friend, or stranger. It's just how they've been perceived by our consciousness, how they're influenced by our consciousness. So when we see a friend, then we impute a friend or we label a friend because of seeing or liking only to see the qualities. Yeah? So that's kind of a mental image that has been put up in our continuity of consciousness, which we believe is actually the friend, but it's just a mental imagination. It's not the actual person, right? And that's also true for our enemy, the person we dislike. It's just a mental fabrication of a mental image, which focuses mainly upon the faults of that individual. Well, if we dislike person B, somebody else might like person B, right? So we see the faults of person B more than the qualities. Let's say person B has 50% faults and 50% qualities, and we like to see 80% faults and only 20% qualities. While somebody else sees person B in a different light, though person B is the same person, but maybe sees 80% qualities and only 20% faults, you see? So it's a lot of things that we perceive on the world around us is depend upon our judgment, yeah, with actually wrong forms of consciousness. So if we go and see that we all living at the same planet, living in a place we have the same problems, then that will help us to connect with each other. Yeah, these kind of world problems, we have to connect with each other. We cannot do it on an individual level only. Of course, we have to start individually, but we have to take it to different platforms on a social, national, international, global levels. So in order to start with that, it's very important to see that we're facing the same problem. Same as we see with the pandemic at the moment, that if we work together, then exchange these different forms of scientific evidence of how the virus spreads and how we can work towards finding a vaccine or medication. Yeah, we have to work together. So with these environmental issues in the world, also, it's very important to see that we all, actually human beings of the same planet. So that's the kind of analogy how we can go to that step on an individual level, which brings our understanding on other levels of social and global levels as well. So if we then start to generate a kind of a personal ethical discipline on an individual level, and also take that into society on a global level, then also, as we saw before, with negative behaviors, things depend upon mental states. Everything we do in society depends upon mental intentions, right? If a government is convinced by the understanding of scientific evidence next to what actually the people want to do in a particular society, they will look into it. As we see now after or during the lockdown, actually in the UK, and especially here in London, we saw that the government is really reflecting. It's very interesting because of all the incredible kind of protests that happened before, especially last year, about environmental issues. Then the government sees, okay, it's a big wish of the community, so maybe it's need to be addressed. And then you can see during the lockdown, even people are thinking about a greener London, having more people using the bicycle instead of public transport or individual cars. It's a very interesting development. So that means if you have a time to reflect upon these aspects of positive behavior, then it will take action. Yeah? So we need a kind of mental understanding before we take an act in, physical kind of doing something. Yeah? So that's why the development of self-awareness, to be aware of these issues, is extremely important. And then this kind of self-regulation. What kind of steps do we do? How do we apply it on a personal and social and community level? So that's kind of the background of how we have to start with a change. We have to start individually and then bring it out to the different platforms to bring more awareness. And with this awareness, people start to think in a different way and will act in a different way. So then, to put it all in a kind of summary or charts, how does the individual aspects of mind training, so to say, influence social and more global levels of understanding of humanity? And how does that bring a kind of universal responsibility? Because that's what we have to go towards too. We have to understand the problem, and not only understand the problem and its issues, but also we have to have this kind of responsibility feeling. Yeah? If you really understand an issue or a problem well yourself, you will understand the problem for others as well. Yeah? So that's why first we have to kind of have a self-awareness, understanding if you yourself were, born like, let's say, 50 years from now, and we don't do anything about climate change, it will be quite difficult with certain aspects of life. Yeah? So you have to be aware of that first yourself in order to understand how others will experience that in the future. Yeah? So that's what kind of first self-awareness. In a similar way, if you want to help another individual who goes through a particular problem in life, if you went through that problem yourself, you know how to deal with it, right? So you have a more self-awareness, so to say. Then, of course, in order to see the problems we have on individual level, then we should generate a kind of self-compassion, as being classified in many modern aspects of social, emotional, and ethical learning, for example. That, of course, we have to deal with our own issues, right? Yeah. And seeing that the destructive emotions, as we just saw, are the root cause of the problems we face in life, we should see that as being cause and effect relationships. And then we move into kind of self-regulation or self-discipline, so to say. So with environmental issues, same thing. When I remember my own mother, she always, many years ago, she was very aware of environmental issues and already separating you know, the different aspects of the waste that comes out of the houses. Even before it was really regulated by the governments, it was very interesting to see that automatically then, as a younger child, you learn automatically those aspects of how to live a good life, right? So in this way, we have to, on a personal level, do quite a bit. Yeah, with just discussed with diets, with different habituations, yeah, using different ways of public transport or not, using the bicycle. So a lot of things can be done on a personal level. Yeah. So we have to start somewhere. And then another aspect of the personal level is to bring it out in different groups, to go and build kind of platforms, as we saw with the many movements that happened, that brings awareness, right? So also on a social level, we have to have what it says here, interpersonal awareness. So that's why we have all these kind of protests who are, you know, helped by and organized by the different organizations to have platforms to discuss things and to bring awareness within society. And one of the things, eventually protest has to happen in order to see or let governments and other people in the world see that something is happening and something has to be done, right? So there's a lot of peaceful protests happened luckily last year, which brought a lot of awareness to the world, yeah, and then not only to individuals but also on the social level, and that will be taken into account by you know, persons who are in the power to make decisions. And there also plays an important aspect of altruism. Yeah, if we see that we're all in the same kind of situation of problems, then also on the social level we have to have an understanding for the people around us in order to work together towards a kind of better world for the future. Yeah? So the same true with environmental issues, that we have to address them as a group, you know. And with altruism, we have to think about others. If you only think about your own kind of economic growth or your own income or your own behavior or your own holidays, then you will never be a part of the whole, right? So that's why altruism also plays an incredible role on the social level. And then because of that, it's easier to talk with other people. If you're more open to others, as we saw in the previous slide, that when we see others as human beings instead of classifying them as friend or enemy. Same thing if you follow the news during the pandemic, you know, world leaders even criticizing each other, and that creates a lot of difficulty in moving forward, in dealing with these issues, right? So if all the governments try to do all the things themselves again, then it becomes an issue. Yeah? So environmental problem, same thing. Yeah? So that's kind of built on what we call the behavior intelligence. Yeah? So we know how to act at a level of society. Yeah? So then we have to take it a step further. Yeah? We have to take it to the community and global awareness. So that we're all part of the same globe, we're all part of the same problems. We have to have that awareness of the interconnectedness of the different aspects of the human beings and the planet and the environment. And recognizing these kind of common aspects of humanity, recognizing that we all strive for happiness and don't like suffering. And if we want to have a happy future, we have to make sure we prepare well. In order to prepare well, not only for our future, but also for future generations, then we have to take measurements, right? So this kind of common humanity is based upon the understanding that we all human beings want happiness and not want suffering. And if we go through a difficulty in life, or when we suffer, we like to be separated from them. And that wish to be free of suffering exists in all of us, also in future generations. Also, they are basically more in number than just one individual via ourselves, right? So to work for that purpose in that regard is a greater picture than just only think about your own personal life. And that will bring a kind of responsibility feeling, you know, to the community and the global engagement. So you can see the initial step is this kind of awareness to understand the issue on different levels of society. And then we have to think about others, and especially those who come in the near future, who have to deal with these issues. And they don't like to experience the different types of difficulties that will come along with environmental issues. So understanding that aspect, we have to act now. And that acting now, you know, we have to engage. We have to apply these aspects of mind training in different ways, in our behavior patterns, right? And the behavior in social levels and on universal levels. So we have to walk into direction to do things on an individual level, but also to work with platforms to bring more awareness to different people who are capable of making decisions in higher levels of society. Yeah? So this awareness is a very essential point, as you see. And then based on this altruism, we think about future generations and see the interdependence of ourselves, the environmental problems, and future generations. Yeah, so to conclude, there's altruism by itself from the point of view of scientific research done in mental health, done even in economics. There's a lot of benefits coming from altruism. Yeah, so also, of course, that will imply also great benefits in environmental change in the future. Yeah? So here, just from mental, just put a few points down for the UK Mental Health Foundation. So just highlighted a few points. It connects with our community, right? It helps the world be a happier place and contribute to more positive community feeling. So that's extremely interesting to see the benefits of altruism, so to say. Then also from the point of view of economics, because there was two important points in society. One is health and the other point is economics. Even from the point of economics, there's a research being done by, which has been published in this book, The Mind of the Leader, which is a research of more than 35,000 leaders of different CEOs of different big companies, so to say. And they came to very interesting conclusions, which is published by the Harvard Business Review publications. And yeah, it's very interesting research to see they come to similar conclusions. To be a successful leader, you need mindfulness, selflessness, and compassion. So these aspects also are very well connected with this altruistic aspect. Yeah? Selflessness is one very important component of altruism, as well as compassion. Yeah? Compassion flows from altruism. And of course, we talked about awareness, to be aware of the issues, which is kind of the mindfulness aspect in this kind of research. So it's very interesting that on a global level, you can see altruism even has great benefits in health issues, which is very important in society from the point of view of expenses. And for the economic growth of a society, we need to depend on businesses. And also in these businesses, it's been proven that this kind of aspects of altruism can bring great benefit. Yeah? So that's also true for developments in the direction of environmental issues. Yeah? So then, yeah, to conclude, a few inspiring kind of quotes from two very inspiring personalities. Yeah? So Mahatma Gandhi in India, he changed the whole country. Yeah? With, at the moment, more than 1 billion people. So he changed the country, was one of the most populous countries in the world by inner change. First, Mahatma Gandhi strived for non-harmfulness and then fight for independence. And basically he has an incredible influence in this incredible country and still until the present time. Another incredible example is His Holiness Dalai Lama, who makes also a very clear point of the need for altruism, the need to work together, the need to work to a form of universal responsibility that benefits society in a global level even. So yeah, that's actually the tradition where I come from for this presentation. And yeah, so thank you very much. And my time is over. So I will leave it over to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Geshe. That was a lovely talk and extremely informative and very helpful. Now, don't forget to ask your questions. You know, when you have a question, just type it in and it'll come up to the panel at the end. Next speaker is known to most of you. He was born in London in 1949, and Ajahn Sucitto then entered monastic life in Thailand in 1975, and he subsequently took bhikkhu ordination in 1976, returned to Britain in 78, and trained under Venerable Ajahn Sucitto in the lineage of the Thai forest master Venerable Ajahn Chah. In 1979, Ajahn Sucitto was part of the group that established Chitta Viveka, Chitta's Forest Monastery in West Sussex. And he's lived there for the greater part of his monastic life. He travels on teaching engagements throughout the world, and his book, Buddha Nature, Human Nature, is available as a free download, and you can get the link either through the Buddhist Society or you can get it online. So without further ado, don't forget to ask your questions and to type them in at the bottom. But thank you very much, Venerable Sucitto. Thank you so much for coming. And I'll pass over to you now.
Okay, good. This is always a little bit mysterious how these things happen, but here we are, I hope. And greetings, friends, welcome. This afternoon's session. Trying to tackle or look into perhaps the major problem. It's not easy, and it's painful, extremely painful to consider that, according to most, the overwhelming majority of informed science, we're heading for an unspeakable disaster. We're like we've lit the fuse for a bomb that's going off. It's already going off. You see the forest fires, you see the floods, you see the climate change, and this is just nothing. This is like a change of degrees in like 0.5%, like 0.5 of a degree centigrade, and we're looking at possibly 2 or 3 degrees. I mean, this is going to be catastrophic. And, you know, it can give us a feeling of hopelessness and helplessness. And, you know, I think eventually you have to say, look, it's better to aspire and try and look rather than just feel hopeless. What will happen, we do not know. But we know that human beings are largely responsible for this mess that we're in, climate mess, the environment mess, and human beings do have the capacity for wisdom. And some are incredibly, the Buddha, for example, our teacher, massive capacity for wisdom that's benefited us all. Could we at least try out of faith in the Buddha? And obviously the Buddha's main consideration of the problems of human beings, ignorance. And ignorance isn't just being kind of like a not knowing, it's a really like a completely wrong view. And the wrong view that lies underneath what I'm proposing. What I'm proposing is the wrong view that lies underneath the environmental crisis, whereby the planet is heating up, plastic destruction, extinction of animals and so forth, is the ignorance of certain or misbeliefs. The first misbelief being that human beings are essentially separate from nature. You know, nature's stuff out there is trees and bunnies and stuff like that, and I'm a human being and I'm separate from that. I can look at it, but I'm not part of it. I'm separate from it. And this is certainly the problem of sense consciousness, because when you look through your eyes, everything else is an object. I'm a subject. We're separate. Unfortunately, this same attitude then comes down to human beings. I'm separate from that human being, right? Who he is, what he is not my problem, right? So this fundamental problem of sense consciousness, whereby we see, we hear, and our reality forms in a very dualistic mode. Yeah. Second problem, major piece of ignorance, is the imagination of superiority, supremacy. We human beings are supreme. And we've seen how this also runs down from, well, if a few badgers, 100,000 badgers a year get killed, well, nothing matter. You know, we're looking at catastrophe, over 50,000 people in Britain dying from COVID. We're killing 100,000 badgers. We're killing over 50 billion animals every year, 100 million sharks every year. Not even mentioned, really. We are important. Nothing else is important. And that, of course, then also runs down. We people in Europe or my country or white people are superior to other people. And they're kind of pagans or confused or dim or weird, but we are the best. And we want to be the best. We have this apex mentality to be the supreme. This is massive ignorance. And the third massive form of ignorance is materialism. That is, by consuming material, we will get happier. By sight, sounds, touches, tastes, flavors, things that I can take from the outside and absorb in, I will feel better. Yeah, and we've seen this is, so with this particular model, then where does material come from? The earth. If you look at anything material, whether it's your clothes, your paint on the wall, a car, rubber, you trace it back, and sooner or later you've got to get down to it comes from planet Earth, or the trees, or the animals. It comes from material source of our welfare is the earth, and we take, and we take, and we take, and we take, yeah, and we don't give it back. And then we go, yeah, and eventually, when it's 7 billion of us and rising, we're eating our future. We are burning our future. We are consuming the ground we live on, the air we breathe, and the water we drink. We're eating it up. Not only eating up, but throwing trash into it. The myth of, the kind of a sub-myth is the idea that there's a place called away. I can throw things away. It's over there. It happens in Turkey. It's over there. It happens in China. It's over there. It's out of my consciousness. So it's gone, no problem, you know. But there isn't an away. There's no such place as away. We're all on, you can't divide the air up into, this is British air and that's French air, you know. So all these myths, why are they myths? Because clearly we're not separate from the rest of nature. We don't own the earth owns us, owns this body anyway. You know, we need the air to breathe. We need the water to drink. We need the balance of, the very fine balance of climate to keep us comfortable. There's only one place we've ever found that has the kind of peculiar mixture of gases and warmth that we could survive on. We're not separate from that. Without that, we are gone. Superiority. Are you superior to a worm? Well, okay, you try and do what a worm does in terms of fertilizing the soil. Are you superior to a bee? Right? You try and do what a bee does. Impossible. In fact, are you superior to a nomad of the desert? You may think because you've got education, you're superior, you try and live like he does. What we find is this idea of superiority means we just do not acknowledge the diversity of intelligences that there are. Animal intelligence, human intelligence, culture, and so forth. We don't acknowledge it. We say only one form is right, my form. And we're seeing this played out not just in terms of nature, in terms of culture. A Eurocentric Western capitalist model is the model. Everything else has judged by. We've seen this played out in racism. The horror that we've witnessed exploding in America, the white supremacist thing, which unfortunately is not just an incident, it's endemic, and it's not just in America. There is a supreme, and this is it, this white skin thing, English language or whatever, you know, and a growing narrowing. Materialism doesn't make you happy, it makes you greedy. And we can see, what does this lead to? Materialism means if it makes me happy, then I want more of it. So it's going to be even happier. And I want to store some up for the future, so I'll be happy in the future. In fact, I want a lot for the future, so I'll be really happy for my future and for my kids too. So you get the system of hoarding, right? So this breeds massive inequality. How can it be the case that through human fabrication and through human law and social construction, you can create systems that allow certain people to be multi-billionaires and other people are starving? How can you human beings with intelligence, how can you generate and support such inequality to other human beings, which can only possibly breed resentment, pain, destruction, fear, and violence? And we're seeing this happening. Certainly the issues in America are also associated with loss of total inequality of resources. This is because of materialism. Materialism doesn't make you happy, it makes you greedier. And these three notions produce what we call the domination exploitation model. It's never said in such a direct, blunt way, and you excuse my language, but essentially, push comes to shove, we dominate everything else. We have the right to take what we want from the beach, from the rock, from the sun, from anywhere. We take it. That's called exploitation. We can clear cut a forest. We don't need its consent. It's there to feed us. So we exploit it. Domination, exploitation. We do this not just to nature, but unfortunately, we do it to creatures. Only 4% of animal life is wild. 96% of animal life is under our control, right? Mass servitude of sentient beings. We eat them by the billions. We only let them live so we can eat them. Is that cruel? Human beings. Exploitation. Dominate, exploit. Current economic model. Economists may correct me on this. I'm not an economist. It certainly looks like 1% getting all the best, everybody else less and less and less, and it requires a poverty, to where you can get cheap labor. The idea is, with this particular model, is cut your costs, which means essentially pay people as little as possible to keep it going. Now, this is crude. Obviously, there must be different ways of looking at this, but this is the model that I see being tweaked and maybe softer in some places, but this is the model that's killing everything. And hopefully not everybody follows that, but it unfortunately does seem to be a very strong model. Yeah. And this essentially leads to a contraction of consciousness, whereby consciousness, the ability to be aware in a mutual way, sentiency, becomes narrowed to a very limited way, a very limited point of view, a very limited range, a very limited set of aims and goals, material benefit for me and mine. That's a very contracted state. And to do that, I will certainly back, those who follow that will back that up with power. How come, another painful fact, a lot of this truth about climate change was known back 1988, 1990s. It was there. Rachel Carson, when was she? 1960s, talking about DDT. James Hansen, NASA scientist, reports to US Congress about fossil fuel damage, 1988. Nothing happens. Right. Because the political system stitched into the money. If you want to be a world leader in many of these countries, you've got to have the money to get the power to buy the votes to get you in. So these lock together, contracted consciousness, and result, violence and confusion. And then even we're looking now also at, the inner costs, social dystopia, delinquency, and then people, mental health deteriorating. Mental health deteriorating. So essentially, we're not separate from the nature. We're also the problem is happening internally. Not just out there that's dying out, something in us is dying out, right? Our own kind of mutual, empathic, loving, moral sensitivity is being severely challenged. So we really cannot separate ourselves from nature. We are the environment. So when we begin to look at some of the results of this, then, you know, you've got to start broadening. There's no such thing as moral high ground. There's moral broad ground, which means you start to look at diversity, diversification, and empathy to creatures, to all creatures, even ones you don't particularly like, who may be dangerous to you. You still think they've got the right to live here on this planet. They too have some kind of intelligence that's come out of this planet. Who says they shouldn't be here? What right do I have to do that, to eliminate them? Now, there's a couple of little quotes here I dug up from the Buddha. The first one, the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Fours, number 70. When kings are unprincipled, royal officials become unprincipled. When royal officials are unprincipled, householders become unprincipled. The people of town and country become unprincipled. The course of the moon and sun becomes erratic. The days and nights, the months and fortnights, the seasons and years become erratic. The blowing of the wind becomes erratic and chaotic. The deities are angered. The heavens don't provide enough rain. The crops ripen erratically. They're sick. People become short-lived. Famine occurs. So the Buddha is establishing morality, or even balanced attitude, ethical morality, not just as a kind of personal thing, but as a cosmic principle. And human beings, the things we can produce that nothing else produces: ethics, love, and wisdom, right? Ethics, love, wisdom. Why don't we do our job of producing ethics, love, and wisdom, right? And focus on that rather than gobbling everything else up. That's our place in the cosmos. If we don't do that, everything starts to fall apart, which, in my opinion, is what we're seeing. When that principle is not understood, we're seeing. And this is the expansive consciousness, the uncontracted consciousness, which starts to contemplate not just me as an individual separate thing, but other human beings. Okay, can I stretch it a bit further? Other human beings, animals. Can I stretch it a bit further? Trees, further, grass, yeah. What about the whole planet? Yeah, keep stretching it, keep stretching it. Yeah. And why? Because not only does the cosmos come into order, but individually we come into balance. Our mind comes out of the madness of separatism and selfishness and domination and exploitation. Our mind comes out of the madness of greed and cruelty. Our mind comes out of the madness of indifference to our fellow creatures. When it comes out of that madness, the mind is radiant. We feel happier and more complete and fulfilled in ourselves. Within, as within, so without. If the planet is suffering, we are suffering. If we're confused, we're going to put confusion onto the planet. And it's going to keep feeding backwards and forwards, till things begin to break down, which is what they're doing. This is the uncontracted state, the awareness, awakening. So in fact, nature is a mirror. We need nature to heal ourselves, because we also have tended to lose touch with the earth. Marvelously, here we are with this screen thing. Well, it's great, but I don't want to live on a screen. Yeah, fortunately, I'm blessed. I've got some trees outside. I can go for walks and stuff like that. This nature keeps me sane. Yeah, it's understood that human beings, coming to nature, it's already therapeutic. The various chemicals, the balance of the planet, the earth. Why did all the great masters come from the forest? The Buddha. Yeah. Why did Jesus come from the desert? Yeah. They all came from the forest, the wilderness. Nature made them, gave them their balance. It told them something, and it keeps telling it to us. Yeah. And we've kind of lost that. We've become so internalized and technolized, as if technology is the only form of intelligence. Now, it is a very powerful and wonderful form of intelligence, but it's intelligence of the people who lived with nature, who could sail across the Pacific Ocean with no navigation, who could survive in a desert with no technology. Yeah? They had intelligence. Who could live in the Amazon for thousands of years, ecologically self-sustaining. So, and what do we say? Okay, what's our plan of action? You know, I hold out some hope. I do notice the governments do make sounds and things, but basically not enough. Suddenly, you know, we see the COVID thing happening, and suddenly we've made massive changes that we previously we didn't think we could make. We did when we had to, because of a crisis. The government sort of shuffled and pulled themselves together, sort of. Well, we're in a crisis. We're still in a crisis. COVID is nothing compared with this. So I think the thing has to come from the grassroots. I'm not talking about violence. I'm talking about everyone understanding the fundamental, what's called the beginner's guide, the Buddha taught to his new interested people. Generosity, dana, share. What you have, if you've got too much, you've got to share it. Otherwise, you're going to go, something's going to go wrong. If you have wealth, if you don't share it, you're going to go crazy. You're going to start hoarding it, and it will eat you up. Share it for your own welfare. Sila, morality. If you start setting up a track in your mind of violence and exploitation, that will curl around and it will damage you. You know? So morality, harmlessness, purity, you know, really seeing it not just as a rule system, but as a way of finding the mutuality to respect you as myself. Loving kindness is bound to happen once we see each other respectfully, without harm and violence and bad speech. Loving kindness is bound to happen. Renunciation. You know, he said, if you get this, then because your mind is beginning to be uplifted, you don't need so much stuff. You don't want so much stuff. It's clutter. Your appetite, sense appetites go down. The Buddha said he could live in unbroken bliss for 7 days and nights under a tree, not even moving, with a state of rapture, right? Okay, he's Olympic. But the fact that you can still, you know, like myself, I'm nowhere near that, but the one can live modestly, simply, frugally, probably substandard to the average norm, because of the happiness that comes from cultivation. And once you have these three together, well, because I live, because people share with me and I share what I have with them. Once you enter into an economy of sharing rather than hoarding, and it's virtuous, so nobody's going to steal anything from you or lie to you, then you create a different culture, a culture of generosity, simplicity, and virtue. And this is, to me, is the nexus, the growth point for human beings, and which we can put, the more we can cooperate, the more we can reach out, the more we can do things in ourselves, even in our meditations, that encourage the expansion of consciousness. Everything else is going to come from that. If that can be big enough and encourage enough, it's going to push, it's going to well up and start to force or push or encourage the political powers to take the steps that are necessary to execute skillful strategies. Look, if we can send a spaceship out to Pluto and take photographs of the moons of Pluto, if we can do that, if we can bust atoms underneath the Swiss Alps, for sure we can fix this planet. My goodness, we've got that amount of savvy, right? You can do these amazing things on the other side of the solar system. Send it back here, right? It's got to be there somewhere. We put an effort, we put our minds to it. So this is my encouragement, and I think I'll pause there for today. I'm not quite certain how long I've gone on for, but I can easily go on for longer than I should. So I'll stop there and let some of that sit and take it in and see what we can come back with. Thank you for listening. Yeah.
Well, thank you very, very much indeed, Venerable Sucitto. That was a wonderful talk. Gave us a lot to ponder, a lot to think about. Don't forget, now you can ask questions too. But thank you very much for a lovely talk. Spot on. And our last speaker is Mr. Colin Ash. Now, I didn't mention at the beginning, but really Colin is behind this whole symposium. So you got a big thank you to Colin. You put a lot of effort into this, and so far it's been a wonderful afternoon, and it's given us a great deal to think about and a lot of responsibility. Now, Colin is as you know, is a senior visiting research fellow in economics at the University of Reading, and his special subject is Buddhist economics, and that's one of his research interests. But Colin has also been a long-term member of the Buddhist Society, member of the English Sangha Trust. In fact, he served as chair of the English Sangha Trust, and has contributed enormously to Buddhism in general. So I won't take up any more time, but Colin, thank you so much for taking time out from your research and all your busyness and your hard work and coming here to be with us. Thank you so much, Colin.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm very happy to be here. I'd like to begin by actually sending my very best wishes to 3 or 4 friends that I see are here as well. We haven't been able to meet for rather obvious reasons for about 2 months, but obviously you're all well enough in order to come to this meeting today, and that's a delight. It's good to know you're still around. I want to begin by saying how much actually I agree with Geshe Namdak and Ajahn Sucitto. And I want to emphasize that, perhaps rather surprisingly, but I must do that because I have a suspicion that what I'm going to say now is going to be rather different from what the monastics have been saying. But that doesn't mean in any way that I'm disagreeing with what they've said. I hope I'm sort of making an additional and very different sort of contribution to this afternoon's discussions. What I've got to do, I think, first of all, is saying a little bit about economics, because I think we sort of get a bad press sometimes, particularly amongst Buddhists. You see, let me just explain. Economists study the way economic affairs are conducted. It's perfectly true. So we look at, explain, analyze, work out the consequences of all the things I think you know about: buying and selling, and working and making money, and growth and unemployment and employment and inflation. And that's the subject we look at, economic affairs. Now, you wouldn't say that geologists, for example, cause earthquakes or volcanoes or landslides or floods. I mean, they study this phenomenon. And you wouldn't say that psychologists who study the mind and behavior are responsible for mental illness. And you wouldn't say that criminologists who study the causes and consequences of crime are responsible for criminal behavior. So I don't want you to think that economists who study all sorts of economic affairs, including the economics of the environment, are responsible for economic catastrophe. We're not. And just a moment, I just want to sort of say a word or two about the range of things that economists are interested in. As I mentioned earlier, yeah, we're interested in jobs and growth and taxes and inflation, But let me just tell you about a couple of the seminars, research seminars I've been to recently. Now, a colleague of mine, University of Reading, gave a very interesting paper a couple of weeks ago on on duties and responsibilities and how that fits into economics, and how economics can sort of explain and evaluate and say something useful about responsibilities and duties. And certainly apropos Geshe Namdak's talk, I attended a virtual seminar quite recently on does generosity make us better off or not? It's often said that generosity brings its own reward as well as a reward to other people, the recipient. And to what extent is that true? And there was a study by economists answering that question. And I only just made it to the Buddhist Society this afternoon, because from 1 o'clock till about 1:45, I was at the London School of Economics, virtually, listening to a very interesting talk by economists on the possible role of religious attendance, going to church and whatnot, the effects on mortality, on depression, and on suicide. And that's economists were interested in that. So yeah, I mean, yes, we do. We are interested in all the sort of usual things, that's usual in quotation marks, but we're interested in much more besides. So economics actually, believe it or not, is all about well-being. So buying and selling things and working and getting income and profit and growth and all the rest of it, for me as an economist, only matter to the extent that they impact upon people's well-being, subjective well-being. Does it, crudely speaking, does it make you feel better or not? Do you feel happier? Do you feel that life is going better? Is life more worthwhile? That's the ultimate criterion, but we economists, that's why perhaps what even drew us to the subject. And likewise, the environment. To what extent does the environment impact upon human well-being? And I must say that ever since the 1920s, and very much so since the 1960s, professional economists have been very interested indeed and very concerned about environmental matters. And so every first-year economics textbook now will have a chapter, a section on environmental concerns, the environmental crisis. And certainly most departments of economics, most university departments of economics will offer a specialist course on environmental economics. It's not off the wall and distant, it's center stage now in the economics profession. So much so that many distinguished economists have made major contributions to attempting to solve this environmental crisis that we're in. And I want to single out one name, Professor Nicholas Stern from the London School of Economics, who in 2005, 2006, produced a seminal report on climate change in which he actually quantified the damage that would be done if we did nothing about climate change, and recommended all sorts of possible partial remedies such as regulation, carbon taxes, and all the rest of it. And Stern now heads a group of economists who are exploring green growth after COVID. How do we pull ourselves out of the undoubted recession that's going to follow the COVID crisis in a way that's environmentally sustainable? So economists are working on all of that, on these matters right now. So it's, my thesis, as it were, is not the environment versus economics. It's like, to what extent can we sort of work together in harmony? And I want to, and actually what I'm going to try and do is give simple answers to very complicated issues, I guess. But I'm concerned about the following, and this is sort of like a compare and contrast exercise. The first question I want to ask is why do Buddhist economists actually have environmental concerns? Why are we interested in environmental matters at all? And then I want to ask, well, how does Buddhism and how does economics explain environmental degradation? And then finally, I want to try and say something about what strategies for environmental protection are offered by the Buddha and the economist. And I hope at the end that you might be convinced that both Buddhism and economics, very different in their approaches, I have to say, that are needed to help solve the environmental problems that we face. So I want to start off with the sort of basic question, actually, which is, why are Buddhists concerned about the environment? And the answer is actually very, very profound, but very straightforward. Why do Buddhists have environmental concerns? Because a fundamental Buddhist virtue is to cultivate care and concern, compassion for all sentient beings. That's the point, for all sentient beings, universally, whatever, whoever, wherever they are. So the well-being of all matters to Buddhists. It's a very fundamental value that good Buddhists try to cultivate. And why does that matter? Well, and here I'm quoting Peter Harvey's very good book on Buddhist ethics, and he says humans are seen as part of the community of sentient beings in a world, a universe, samsara, of suffering. And so in order to liberate ourselves, we must cultivate qualities such as harmlessness, compassion, loving kindness towards all beings. And the reason, as it were, for doing that is because as we do that, we diminish our own greed and hatred and delusion. And this is an attitude in which other beings have intrinsic value, independent of what they do for us. And I would argue that Buddhist environmental ethics are deep green ethics. And apart from that, there are other reasons, there are other reasons why Buddhists have environmental concern and want to support the natural world, because, and we could call these sort of enlightening non-self-interest reasons for supporting the environment, because the natural world has historically, and still is, viewed as being a resource for Buddhist practice since the time of the Buddha. Monastics of all traditions, including non-Buddhist traditions, as Ajahn Sucitto has just mentioned, value solitude that one can obtain from natural surroundings, forests and groves and parks, to practice. And the practice is one of, well, because nature evokes impermanence and suffering versus what one can experience in relatively sanitized cities. So in nature, leaves fall, flowers fade, the seasons come and go, the weather's one way and another way, animals hunt and are hunted, mice can be construed as being disguised as monkey-eating tigers, and on and on and on. And so natural environment are conducive to tranquility and equanimity and restraint, compared with, say, practice in Oxford Street. Cultivating tranquility and equanimity and restraint in Oxford Street is very advanced lay practice. So those are the reasons, I think, deep down, why Buddhists value the environment and have environmental concerns. Now, it's very different from why economists have environmental concerns. It's very simple, because the environment, the world of nature, concerns people. It's people-focused. It focuses on the well-being of people. And so air quality and water quality and oceans and animal life and forest and the climate itself and the landscape, because they all affect people's well-being. So the earth is viewed as a human life support system. And that's what economic activity impacts upon. So if the environment is degraded by our own consumption or traveling or buying or selling or growth or whatever, if the environment is degraded and people are made worse off, this is of concern to economists. And this is why people like Professor Nick Stern is very energized to do all sorts of work on mitigating the effects of climate change. Now, this is a shade of green, which is much paler. It's quite different from an intrinsic at the intrinsic value of nature, which is a part of the way Buddhists see the world. So here, the focus is on the way individuals use the Earth's resources, and in a sense, if you know, what can be done about it, as it were. So I've tried to set out why, on the one hand, Buddhists, and on the other hand, economists, why they have environmental concerns. One is deep and the other is more shallow. No doubt about that. So let's now turn to the second question I posed, which is how do Buddhists and then how do economists explain the terrible environmental degradation that's being experienced right now? And Geshe Namdak and Ajahn Sucitto have made these reasons very clear. They're because of you know, what one might call deep cognitive errors. And of course, ignorance and selfishness is what I'm alluding to there. Identification with our desires and aversion. And so environmental problems are a particular example of the causes and conditions of dukkha, seeing things my own way, in relation only to my own interests. And nature is perceived as a resource that I feel entitled to exploit. It caters to my wants. And the consequences for others, and more broader consequences, is largely ignored. And the upshot, as Ajahn Sucitto was pointing out, is materialism, consumerism, which is the manifestation of craving and grasping and attachment. And so forests are just so much timber, with no concern at all for the wider environmental consequences, no concern for the well-being of future generation. And the ultimate irony is that we exploit the environment in this way. We're attached to rebirth in samsara, but we've become trapped in lifetimes in an existence in a world which we ourselves are increasingly degrading. And this in Ajahn Sucitto's splendid book, he describes as the schizoid view. So we hang on to things and wreck things, but in fact, deep down inside, we could well value in the future. And it's an important teaching, I think, not just in Buddhism, but in other Asian religions, is the fact that we are the future. We are our future. We're reborn either as humans in an appalling environment, or possibly as those great survivors, cockroaches, which is another interesting possibility for reflection. How do economists explain environmental degradation? Now, the interesting thing is, in a sense, they explain environmental degradation in exactly the same way as Buddhists do. As an economist, as economists, we explain environmental degradation in terms of selfishness and ignorance. Selfishness and ignorance, the pursuit of self-interest, while often ignoring the impact of our choices and our actions on others, including our own future selves. Selfishness, greed, and ignorance. And so there are concrete examples. For example, the smelter, which pollutes the neighborhood, or the power station, which ignores the effect of CO2 emissions on the climate, the motorist who ignores the pollution and the congestion they charge when in fact they drive, and they ignore the fact that oil will run out, at a much more micro level, the smoker who pollutes the air that I breathe, the kid playing, you know, playing music which disturbs me. Here's another current example: not wearing a face mask, or breaking the lockdown, or the person who declines the vaccination. They do it for their own reasons. That's undoubtedly true. But as they do it, they raise the risk for other people. And economists, as I say, certainly since the 1920s, have been well aware of these sorts of problems. And from then on until, of course, very recently, have been very concerned with what to do with that. We call them negative externalities, unintended, usually unintended consequences of pursuing our own goals. And as I say, every well-trained economics undergraduate now comes across this in sort of economics 101. So in a nutshell, you know, the problem to the economy, for the economist, is there is a malfunction in the economy, and maybe economists, you know, want to try and fix that malfunction, or have ideas, strategies, or whatever for correcting that malfunction. What about what strategies for environmental protection are offered by the Buddha, by Buddhists? And the answer is deeply transformative strategies for getting to the root of the problem. So, taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and practicing Sila Samadhi and developing wisdom, and abiding by the precepts, non-harming precepts, of not taking what's not offered, including what's not offered by future generations, and avoiding false speech in the sense of not inflaming desire by ridiculous advertising or raising material expectations. And in meditation, developing the Brahma Viharas, appreciating the value of all sentient beings, they suffer, developing caring concern for all living beings, practicing loving kindness, compassion, happiness, and rejoicing in the happiness of others. And mindfulness, guarding the sense doors, becoming increasingly aware of one's attachment and aversion, coming off autopilot. So gradually avoiding entrapment in desires and acquisitiveness, so it's easier to moderate one's consumption, and all the while undermining and deconstructing the sense of self which identifies with those desires. And I will also emphasize karma as well, taking responsibility for our actions. We're responsible for the effects of our intentional actions. Do we want to be reborn in a hellish environment or not? And these Buddhist strategies are interior technologies. I view them as being interior technologies, and are deeply green. They get to the root of the problem. Now, what about the economist? What can the economist contribute to this goal, or at least mitigating the current crisis? Buddhist practice is transformative. Buddhism's, the aim here is to transform the individual, as Geshe Namdak said at the outset, changing attitudes and then changing behavior. But I have to say, how long have we got to do it? You know, it's like saying all the world's problems, I mean, not just environmental problems, all the world's problems would be removed immediately at one stroke if we were all fully enlightened arahants. And that's undoubtedly true. The trouble is, everything I've heard about the dire consequences of the environmental crisis are going to come rather sooner than everybody becoming arahants, to be honest. And the question is, can we afford to wait until we all become fully enlightened beings? And if the economy is malfunctioning because of individual selfishness and stupidity or ignorance, the economist says, well, what can be done to fix it? So the task of environmental economists is, as I say, coming up with, if you like, superficial strategies, which are not going to completely solve the problem, but they can mitigate the harm, as it were. And so economists propose, for example, incentives for environmentally benign behavior and penalties for polluting behavior. Because, as economists see it, the problems are that individuals, when we buy things, produce things, sell things, travel places, we take into account the costs and benefits to ourselves and ourselves alone, and we ignore the costs that we impose upon others by our own selfish, ignorant behavior, then what we should do is to try and confront all of us individuals with the damage we do to other people. And so the economists will advocate green taxes, for example, taxing people on the damage they cause to other people. The idea is, if on top of the price you pay for a gallon of petrol, on top of that, you have to pay an additional charge for the pollution caused, then you might travel less. Equally, if you want manufacturers, business to operate in a greener way, you might want to subsidize, excuse me, green technologies to make it cheaper, to make it easier for entrepreneurs, for business people to operate in a greener way. If you want to reduce CO2 emissions, why don't you have carbon taxes and carbon trading of carbon permits? So the point is, polluters end up paying a price to pollute, reflecting not just their own costs, but the costs they impose upon others. That's the basic idea. So the left to its own devices, if you like, the laissez-faire economy comes up with a very substandard, a dysfunctional result. Let's get in there and try and correct it. And the other thing I think that economists can offer, or attempts to offer, economists do not have the solution of anything. I want to come back to that point a little bit later on. Economists don't have the answer. What we can do is make suggestions, and then politicians or whoever, right, can either ignore it or act upon it. But one thing economists can do is to help to provide answers to difficult choices, to hard questions, which to be honest, may need a bit more help than from wisdom and compassion. Let's put it like that. So, should a forest be cut down for timber or preserved? Well, that's quite interesting. Supposing it's cut, and one can see benefits and costs, advantages and disadvantages in doing something like that. So maybe the forest is being grown for wood, so it's going to be cut down eventually. While it's living and growing, quite clearly it's good for the environment. If it's only going to be cut down, why would they want to cut it down? Well, one reason for cutting it down is because we could use more wood to build housing in a more sustainable way. But on the other hand, there's an increased cost, there's an increased fire risk, isn't there? It's like lots of desirable actions have themselves have adverse consequences, and it needs to be, how do we make these sorts of judgments? Here's another one. We're all in favor of renewable energy. Wind farms provide renewable energy. Should an ugly wind farm, which gives us more renewable energy, be built if it destroys wonderful windswept moorlands? Here's one which is nearer to home, as I live in the Chilterns, which is, what about the proposed railway, a new proposed railway that will greatly reduce road pollution, traffic pollution, benefit undoubtedly for the environment. On the other hand, it's going to cut through beautiful, unspoilt countryside. What's the right answer there? I don't know what the right answer is, but I know ways of providing information that might guide our policymakers one way or the other way. What about, well, here's another one, you see. What about, yes, take a developing country that's cutting down the rainforest in order to in order to grow cash crops, for example. How can you make that happen when local farmers say, that's a great idea, we'd like to do it, but we're poor people, we can't afford to do it? This focuses the attention on issues of income distribution and subsidies. How can we have economic growth that's sustainable? There are benefits from economic growth, undoubtedly benefits from economic growth. They just come with a huge cost. So how can we break that kind of nexus in some way? People, Ajahn Sucitto, actually, towards the end of his book, he's got some sort of suggestions for individuals to contribute. And, you know, I think he suggests buying organic food, eating less meat, more veg, more vegetables that's grown locally, not so many food miles, which is great, which is very good. But how do you respond to people who say, I'd love to do that, but I can't afford it? And a sort of an economic approach, you're sort of aware of the importance of getting the balance right. And when we think in terms of at least when I think in terms of, you know, what can we do to reduce pollution? What can we do to for species conservation? What can we do for this, that, and the other? I can come out with easy solutions like taxes or subsidies or whatever, but often they bring up in my mind additional complications, which point to perhaps the need for poverty alleviation or conceivably redistribution of wealth. Certainly, it sort of unambiguous. You know, here's another example, which Ajahn Sucitto mentions in his excellent book, which is subsidies. Farmers in Europe are subsidized to clear hedgerows and trees from unproductive land that would otherwise be used for agriculture, but they're subsidized to do it. Well, the economists would say, don't do it. But farmers are going to lose out by doing that. How do you give them an incentive not to do that, you see? Well, you remove the subsidy without any doubt at all, and then what? So I want to emphasize that economists don't have the answer to any of these problems at all, but they can spell out what the options might be, and that might help the people who make the decisions. So let me sort of conclude by sort of summarizing what I've said so far and pointing to perhaps the way ahead. I talked about why Buddhists, why economists have environmental concerns. And in a way, they're big differences. One points to the deep green issue, the other one deals with the paler green superficial problems or cures. Buddhist point of view, the environment we're part of that environment, and Buddhist values point in the direction of protecting that environment. Economists are concerned because we're concerned about the welfare of people. We're concerned about the welfare of people. So yes, the environment is viewed instrumentally rather than it doesn't have intrinsic value. But then how do Buddhists and economists explain environmental degradation? Actually, more or less in exactly the same way, right? Common or garden selfishness and ignorance for economists, much deeper ignorance and selfishness, fundamental problems of how we see the world and ourselves as Buddhists. And then what strategies are offered to deal with these horrendous problems? Well, from the Buddha comes suggestions for deep personal transformation, sila, samadhi, panya, to tackle these sorts of generic problems which lead to dukkha. And the economist, certainly this particular economist sitting here, has absolutely no problems about that at all. In fact, that would make the economist's job, as it were, a lot easier. The economist essentially says, hey, there's a problem here that we ought to tackle immediately, and that converting everybody to being, quote, good Buddhists could well take quite a while. And meantime, we can devise strategies, if you like, carrots and sticks, which may be corrective. Economists are more superficial, we're more specific, and more immediate. And I'll just repeat and sort of conclude by repeating that the economist's job, as it were, would be a lot easier if we all cultivated wisdom and compassion. Indeed, if we were all enlightened arahants, economists would go out of a job, and that would be a good thing too. But that just may take a while. And where we're sort of coming together, I think, now on all of this is, in a way, economists need all the support that Buddhists can bring in terms of rhetoric, in terms of the political process, essentially, influencing opinion, changing the public mood, campaigning, and all the rest of it. Because in a democracy, I want to repeat this, in a democracy, policies are not made by economists. Economists may or may not be invited to comment and make suggestions, but it's like medical experts now at time of crisis. You can offer it, you may be asked for your opinion, and the policymaker may act on that opinion or ignore that opinion. So the answer or rather the resolution to these problems is essentially going to be political. And all Buddhists have a role in bringing their concerns into the public sphere with a view to getting necessary changes. And as I say, supporting those little initiatives, those relatively minor initiatives that we economists can offer. So, for example, if economists suggest that there should be more pricing for pollution on the roads, and suggest a way of doing this is to impose taxes, which will undoubtedly raise the cost of private vehicle travel, then it would be nice if Buddhists would say, well, that's a good idea. It's a rather shallow idea. It's not a deep idea, but it's a step in the right direction. So I don't see any conflict between Buddhism and economics. I see conflict, but I see conflict between Buddhism and many economic actors who are behaving in a selfish, ignorant way. And many economists would agree as well that sort of behavior has to change, either at a most fundamental level, the internal transformation that the Buddha is proposing, or as a second best, by means of carrot and stick, providing incentives and penalties in order to get ordinary selfish, ignorant individuals to behave in a more environmentally friendly and sustainable way. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Colin. That's given us a lot to think about, and I can see a lot of questions have come in around your particular talk, and economic questions that have arisen from that. Now is our chance to ask some questions, and there's a lot of questions have come in, and there's an interesting one here, if I can find it, which I was looking at, which I think would probably be on many people's lips or many people's minds. But we'll start with a very simple question, really. One of which there is, anyway, it's from Terence. What role, if any, should the profit motive, corporations and capitalism play in addressing and reversing climate change? So Colin, probably you should look at that one. You've answered it in your talk, I know.
Yeah. Well, what is it? The profit motive?
The profit motive, corporations, because I understand that the ethos of corporations is to maximize profit for shareholders, and capitalize play in addressing and reversing climate change.
Well, I mean, I hope I've given some views about that. Whatever you think, I mean, there is a radical approach to it, which is to say corporations shouldn't be in the business of making profit. And that's a perfectly feasible position to take. In a sense, it's not something that as an economist I can make a contribution towards, except to say that there are some things, some items, some things that the profit motive is is inappropriate to apply to is inappropriate. For example, I'll just pick up one example: the provision of healthcare, for example. That does not seem to me an appropriate arena for profit maximization. But assuming that one does not completely revise the whole system, which, as I say, is a possibility, and assuming you do work with corporations which essentially are in the business of making money for their shareholders, then the issue is to what extent can one regulate them to get them to perform in an environmentally friendly way. And in principle, that can be done if there is the political will to do it.
That, of course, is the thing, isn't it? If there is the political will.
Quite.
And in part, the problems are the way in which our democracy is organized, which is dependent to some extent on donations from the corporations themselves, which create the problems. But perhaps there are some answers from Venerable Sucitto might like to chip in there and have something to say.
Yeah, well, I think one thing is if they stop subsidizing fossil fuel, that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
You know, like stop subsidizing destructive industries and start supporting industries that deal with renewables. You know, actually, there are productive energies that can be put into fostering the planet. Like, why not make tree planting an industry? Why not make policing the environment? You know, why not pay people to police the environment rather than just police the streets? You know, why not make polluters pay?
Yep.
Yeah, these kinds of things. You can create industries that would make a profit out of saving the earth rather than destroying it.
Yep.
I think also you look at like most big companies, how long do they live for, really? You know, 80 years, 100 years, they collapse. But it's not the companies themselves, it's the underlying hoarding mechanism of the stock market. You know, like most money, it's nothing to do with commodities. It's just to do with trading credit and finances. It's not, you know, most money is made not through the sweat of the brow, but through investing it in something that's going to grow by itself. You look at the big houses in London, people buy them, nobody lives in them. The money goes up, the price goes up, they rake up the money. That is not ethical, right? So if you reduce the unethical use of money and turn it towards things that are skillful, yeah, that's the way you do it. What about all the tax havens? What about the money that's going from the City of London into the Cayman Islands that's completely beyond government control, right? You know, it's New Jersey and Cayman Islands, what they call the money that is invested in safe accounts that nobody can look into. The squirreling away is the problem. Now, if you make money something that has a sell-by date, right? So you got your £1 or your $1. By the end of the month, it's only worth 80p, right? You got to get rid of it. By the end of the year, it's worth 10p or something like that. You don't hoard it; you use it. Money, if it's used, is fine. It's when it's hoarded, it's the problem. And that's what we've got to get around, in my opinion.
And Namdak, Venerable Geshe, have you any comment on that? Geshe Namdak?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm also quite new to the Zoom, the Zoom kind of way of conference. So yeah, I mean, it's already been explained more or less by the two other speakers that if there's, you know, the government has to make decisions, right, in this particular relation with this question. So they have to make a decision subsidizing certain aspects of development that has a more greener kind of way of producing different kind of products, right? So like different products are produced to make sure they get the right subsidization, that they can keep the price low, that everybody else also can buy it, not only the people who have a choice to buy it or not. As been addressed before, that certain green kind of products are more expensive, but you know, if they get subsidized in a particular way, that the majority of the people on this planet can afford it, then there's more interest, and then because of that, then there will be more production in that direction as well.
Good. Well, here's another question. Now, this is really a question I'm sure many people are thinking about, and that's to do with the sort of deep green view of climate change from the point of view of Buddhism. A friend of mine said when we were discussing climate change, I don't want to live like a monk. That's going to be so restrictive. Where will all our creativity and fun come from if we're living like monks?
More fun, maybe.
Second question, how does reducing carbon footprint and negative environmental impacts affect government and business? Would it be damaging to governments and businesses globally? So there's two questions here, really. But Namdak, would you like to start with the one about fun and monks?
I mean, yeah, to become a monk may be more fun, but yeah, you have to be realistic, right? So not everybody can live within the morality of an ordained one. There's no need for that to do, right? So it's not a matter of restrictions that a monk can do and lay people cannot do, right? It depends on the mind. It depends on behavior and attitude. Yeah, if you're a monk and you live up in the mountains, you think you're quite something, but mentally you're not completely doing the right thing, then that's not really the way to live your life. So in a similar way, a person in ordinary life can still be extremely creative in having fun in a way that is more sustainable for the future, right? So instead of just driving around in the countryside, go for a walk. There's many opportunities individuals can take a direction into to make life more fun than the usual habits. Because of greed, because of different desires, we believe in certain aspects of our behavior to be producing happiness, right? But the question is if it's really producing happiness or not. So in that regard, if you analyze that more, then we can change behaviors and even have more fun in other forms of behavior that is a more greener future. Yeah?
Yeah. Thank you very much. And Sucitto, would you have something to say there?
Well, the idea of being a monk certainly turned me off. I never There's very much a day at a time, just hanging on. But it's got better. I think the thing is that once you kind of really start to come to terms with looking at your own mind and working with that, you just got to meet some of this kind of craving and thirst for a sense of stimulation. And it does work. You find actually, as everybody who meditates, as far as I can see, everybody who starts to meditate and keeps it going, their desires actually diminish. Not because they're repressing it, just they get better sources of happiness, which is kind of from the purity of their own mind. It's standard, it's not just monks. Everybody goes towards non-violence, towards harmlessness, towards sobriety, not because it's more miserable, but just because it feels better. And that's such a powerful thing. And the Buddha was a pragmatist. He wouldn't have taught this thing if he didn't think it felt good, because he knows people are primarily motivated towards pleasure. But you find there's a greater pleasure that begins to dawn in your life as you get that way. So that's essentially, that's the monastic thing. When it looks on the outside, it looks pretty grim. But believe it or not, we have a lot of fun.
Colin.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I'd like to add to what Ajahn Sucitto has said. There again, coming from the dismal science, economists have got this reputation of the dismal science, and really that's not true, because we are concerned with the causes of well-being, and there's a whole you can characterize as happiness economics, which I'm very interested in professionally as well as doing it myself, and this raises a very important point, which is when you talk about happiness or well-being, there are different aspects of it, different components of it. So the hedonism, on the one hand, which is typically, involved in in ordinary mundane pleasures, let's put it like that, including actually going for a drive in the countryside, but also including things like a good meal, and on and on and on. That is one, and having money, and having some money as well. That's another thing that makes people happy. There again, there's always a caveat, up to a point. A lot of research, not surprisingly in economics, has been done on, does money make you happier? And the answer is up to a point. And economists work out that point for what it is worth. Beyond that point, you're not made any happier. Lottery winners, for example, are lottery winners happy? Yes, they are, for a little bit. And then they just revert to the normal, ordinary baseline miserableness. But that's just one aspect of happiness. And now another aspect of happiness, and I think Ajahn Sucitto is alluding to that, is the contentment one gets from a life, from a well-lived life, a purpose, a life full of meaning and purpose. And I have a sneaking suspicion that that's what our monastics are doing. I certainly hope they're feeling it's a life full of meaning and purpose. And that's an important source of well-being as well. And that's all I've got to say on that topic, actually. I think there was something else in the question, but I've forgotten what it was.
Yeah, well, the other part of the question was one which we could ask you, and that is, how does reducing carbon footprints and negative environmental impacts affect government and business? Would it be damaging to governments and business globally? I suppose what he's saying is, if we were to reverse the effects of climate change now, would there be mass starvation and mass poverty, illness, plague, pestilence, and all the rest of it? Would it be feasible? Would it actually be possible? Is there an economic model that could do that?
Of course. But there has to be a will to do it. I mean, as far as governments are concerned, and if governments want taxation in order to do whatever they want to do with taxation, just think about carbon taxes. Taxing the polluter. Excellent for government revenue. And what can they invest that those taxes in subsidizing green technology, in subsidizing public transport projects, in subsidizing the development of improved battery storage, other aspects of green technology, high-speed broadband, for example. Very important job, which actually I'm sure is being considered right now, is home insulation and putting in boilers which are dependent on electricity rather than oil. And I mean, these are serious things which are under consideration now, because people are looking at how the economy is going to go once the COVID business is out of the way. Because other things being equal, you're going to follow up with a horrible medical crisis with a lot of unemployment. And the issue then is, well, what can all these unemployed people do at relatively short notice? Economists and policymakers often talk about shovel-ready projects. So building HS2 may or may not be environmentally a good thing to do. It will take a long time to do it. But things like home insulation, for example, something that can be done locally and relatively quickly, be good for jobs, be good for the environment. So, I mean, yes, I'm positive, but I mean, it requires a will to do it. Will starvation result? I can't imagine why it should, to be absolutely honest. If we go on the way we are going on, could well result. So I don't really see what the ill effects in aggregate would be. Now some businesses, will have a worse time. There's no doubt about that. The fossil fuel industry will have a bad time. The renewable energy sector will have a better time. And that's the way we want it, isn't it? It's not all these policies and all these actions have consequences. And the question is that what the public want or not? There will obviously be pressure, political pressure from the oil industry or whatever to resist these kinds of things. But there's no reason why that And that resistance should dominate if enough people want the change. If they don't, then we know what's going to happen. So, I mean, the idea of a relatively prosperous economy, which is working on encouraging environmental projects, the sort I've mentioned, it's a very positive one, I would have thought.
And this would also take into account the huge inequalities in the world, like there's so much starvation, lack of water, fresh water, and sanitation, and so on.
Yes,
because a lot of the argument for sort of modern technology and the burning of energy is that it somehow will lead to greater equality in terms of matters of that kind. But I think you've answered the question. And here's one here. This is one for Geshe Namdak, but I'd like also the rest of the panel. With such great inequality in the UK, how does one encourage giving and deal with the craving mind? That's from Chris to Geshe Namdak, and also for the rest of the panel.
Please, giving.
Well, for craving,
Yeah.
with such great inequality in the United Kingdom, how does one encourage giving and deal with one's greed, the craving mind?
Yeah, you just have to focus first upon if that craving mind of greed is really bringing sustainable happiness for self and others, right? So if you meet wealthy people, and wealthy people who are extremely generous, have different kind of charities to work for society, then those people themselves, they are more open-minded, they seem to have a much more happier life. If you meet wealthy people who are very selfish and self-concerned, they only have the fear of losing the money or wanted to get more, right? So then you can see actually the greed in that regard causes a problem. And the generosity in that regard causes great benefit for self and others. So looking at different examples we can see in the world, or meeting people who are in the possibility to share, then you can see straight away the difference in their minds, right? So in that regard, if people start to see that being more generous, actually brings more happiness for self and others, then it's just a matter of a shift of the mind to that direction, and then things can be done, right? So then people can support these kind of things of environmental issues or other problems we face in society. It's just a matter of understanding that actually the greed of wanting more and the fear of losing the money actually doesn't bring real happiness, but actually to share with others brings actually a more sustainable form of happiness, not only for yourself, but also for others.
Sucitto, you have some thoughts on this?
Well,
It's fundamental.
Yeah, well, you've got to approach it from different angles. First of all, I think as Geshe mentions, any Buddhist teacher will mention, the more that you do a little introspection, you're going to see that thirst and craving doesn't make you feel good, and it never will. So you have to cultivate that. And all human beings have got some sense of empathy. It's a very fundamental trait. We have empathy for our children, we have empathy for our neighbours. And that mothers don't charge kids for their milk. It's pretty natural, because they feel bonded. Now, if you, on the external level, if you can encourage people to meet, and I think one of the things we're looking at also is tragic, is the loss of the commons. That means that people don't have meeting places where you can just meet freely without paying. If you meet people, you get to know people, friendships develop, sharing, you've got some sense of communality to share into. The problem is now, well, one problem is the degree to which society is segmented. And wealthy people go this way, and unwealthy people go that way, and the twain don't meet. And resentment and fear builds up, and this is the problem. So externally, I think you need social change. Internally, you need psychological change. You find that actually living comfortably with other people is very satisfying and interesting.
Colin, do you have anything to add to that?
Me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, just a very small point, actually. I find it very, very encouraging that mindfulness practice is being encouraged so widely. I mean, this is outside of the Buddhists, but in schools and all over the place. I'm personally very pleased that a 2,500-year-old meditation practice can be viewed as having the therapeutic benefits that it does have. And surely one of the things that mindfulness does is enable one to step back a fraction from the automatic tendencies to have more, to actually see that in the mind, give you an opportunity to let go of it and step back from it. And I mean, who knows what the effects of mindfulness in schools, for example, does to kids later on in their lives, if they keep at it. I do view that as very positive in terms of being able to recognize these pushes and pulls that are going on, enabling us to step back from all of them.
Well, there's a question that comes here from Jakali, and she says, I'm a secondary school teacher, so it relates to what you're saying about schools. I'm a secondary school teacher and I teach a unit on compassion, but I find that the staff and the pupils don't appreciate its value. Any suggestions on how I could help others to get the message? And I can see, I mean, this is one of the arguments, isn't it? Well, what's the use of, teaching RE, for instance, in school? What's the point of teaching compassion? You can't do anything with it, you can't make money out of it, or you can't, this is how I'm afraid how people think. Colin?
Well, I mean, I really think you should ask the monastics that question. I mean, to me, compassion is a virtuous quality. But there again, it comes back to what sort of society you want. I'm talking as a Buddhist to probably a mainly Buddhist audience with Buddhist monastics here. And it's like, what's the value of compassion? Well, ultimately, it leads to a more worthwhile, probably happier life, not just for ourselves, but for other people as well. It's a question of how we relate to people who are less fortunate than ourselves. That seems to be an important quality to develop, actually, in a civilized society. My concern is I'd like to think my concern is always with the worst off members of society. People talk about, inequalities of this, that, and the other, and that's true. And sometimes one can do something about inequality, and sometimes it's much more difficult. The motivation surely has got to be focusing on the worst off members of society. There again, in these sort of academic discussions about well-being, how one can measure well-being and all the rest of it, you get people rating their well-being on a 10-point scale or something. And the question is, well, what can you do? Who do you want to direct your attention to? And the answer is the people at the bottom of the scale, the people who are feeling suicidal, for example, having a really bad time. So, yeah, I find personally my orientation is always towards, the worst off members of society, people who are having the worst possible time of things and thinking about what one can do at both a personal level and at a big policy level to help the worst off members of society. And that is essentially a motivation which I think comes from compassionate concern for the welfare of other people. And by the same token, I'd like people to feel compassionate towards me because we're all, brothers and sisters in dukkha.
Yeah.
Now, Geshe?
Yeah, so I mean, generally speaking, the benefits of compassion has been quite well examined in the scientific world of psychology, for example. That there's a lot of research been done already in the fields of emotional intelligence, right? That different pilot projects in schools and colleges and even police forces that it brings great benefit. And based on that scientific evidence, then different universities have developed projects to train also children. So maybe this person who asked the question can look into those things. For example, we have the social, emotional and ethical learning, set up by Emory University, for example. And also Stanford University has a lot of things done under the guidance of Thupten Jinpa regarding compassion training. So there's a lot of scientific backup to prove the benefits of being more compassionate and how to introduce that on the different levels of society, including schools. So there's a lot of evidence people can maybe look at. Yeah, and that basically comes from the principle aspect of Buddhist kind of law of cause and effect, right? That if you see that the selfish concern or the self-interest or the self-cherishing attitude is basically a cause for suffering, but cherishing others is a cause for happiness. So this is kind of a Buddhist principle. The Buddha didn't invent that principle, but the Buddha just examined the law of cause and effect relationships and came to this conclusion. So that same law of cause and effect relationships is also being examined in the scientific world. And now that's also why these bigger universities, they always have, you know, completed kind of set up programs to train, you know, the youth and people in society to conduct these kind of aspects of how to train, or how to cultivate compassion or social, emotional, and ethical learning.
And this is available on the Stanford University website, is it, in Emory?
Yeah, you can.
So you would be able to gain access to it, maybe
yeah, and there's
download information.
Yeah. And there's a lot of trainers already across the globe who can train these kind of disciplines. Yeah, so there's basically scientific evidence with the Buddha already 2,500 years basically talked about these aspects of life. Yeah, so it's very nice to see that actually works and can be used in a very, very constructive way.
Good. Sucitto, you might have something to add to that.
Well, I think probably a few words. I suppose the Buddha's point of view, he certainly didn't invent compassion. It's a matter of not so much of generating compassion as much as what stops it. Why aren't we compassionate? It should be a natural thing. You know, what is it that blocks compassion? If you remove that, it's quite natural, and then once that starts, you can increase it. I think one of the things you can do at a very fundamental level is what mindfulness is about. Once you establish, you get the mind deeply centered, then the heart opens. You know? You're less spun out in your fantasies and ideas about other people, and you get grounded. Quite naturally, the heart starts to open up. And that's that fundamental entering into true presence, true embodied heartful presence, is the place where everything turns around. That's why mindfulness is kind of good, because it's very, you know, it doesn't ask you to believe or feel anything other than just get where you are. I think if you get there, truly, you're going to find that you want to be more loving because it makes you feel better, and you don't want to have conflict with others. And this is where compassion develops.
Well, yes, I think, you know, maybe if she started the class, you know, with doing some just quiet sitting,
right,
you know, let them all settle down, and then they'd start to feel a greater warmth towards each other and less anxious and less worried. Because kids are often very frightened, aren't they?
Self-enclosed as well.
Yeah, they could just start practicing, just being quiet in the classroom and just being with each other for a short while. Colin, you might have some suggestions on that.
Well, I've just said my piece.
You just said your piece, okay. Yes, now here's one from Lucy. So how do you think those of us who are painfully aware of the need for urgent and individual systemic change can influence others to escape their fears, denial and distractions, and join in this movement, or join us? It's so easy for people to be defensive or paralyzed to the facts of such difficult realities and choices. Inward change, definitely. So, Colin, any suggestions there?
Well, yeah, I mean, focus on the good is the answer, or it certainly helps. I mean, the danger we have these days with climate change on top of COVID and all of that is we do get into just a terribly negative mindset, and we get extremely frightened and anxious. And I do think we've got to sort of focus on the good. I mean, learning from the experience of the lockdown and COVID. You know, I've seen, because I don't live in a city, I live out in the countryside, and it's a very different experience for me. But I mean, even where I live now, the neighborliness, for example, that we've enjoyed and we've contributed to, I think is like truly, truly wonderful. We should celebrate that. And I mean, just little things like, I mean, on the environmental front, I mean, it is very easy to get into a sort of a doom and gloom mentality, and it does undoubtedly look bad. But I think it was in yesterday's newspaper. I haven't got it with me actually, but I read that, was it April or May or anyway, they'd been the first month in UK history when energy from fossil fuel energy was zero. It was all obtained from electric and hydro power and wind power. Something, as I say, I'm muddling up the news completely. But I read that and I thought, you know, particularly with this discussion today, it's not all bad news. I mean, there is bad news out there. But I think we do have to celebrate the good when we see it. And as I say, you know, Lucy's question is how do we respond? How do we, in a sense, cheer other people up? That sounds a bit trivial, but I mean, just focus on the good in the first instance. And that may allay our anxiety and give us more confidence to act positively to make the world even better. But I think if one's in a negative trough, consumed with anxiety and fear, we tend to sort of hunker down in our own psychological bunker. And that's not healthy.
So no, I would actually like to ask the last question because we're getting
I've got to leave.
1:45 and you have to leave, don't you?
Yeah.
Have you time for one last question, Venerable Sucitto?
Yeah, it's short.
Well, this is very short. What are the three most important things for an individual to do in relation to the climate crisis?
First of all, stay attuned, look after your heart. Don't get despondent. Don't give in to despair. Very important. Don't give in to despair. Second thing, cooperate. Meet other people. Join a group. However loose the knit it is, collect will give you strength. We can't solve anything individually. We have to cooperate and meet other people. Entertain. Give up, bring a creative dialogue. You don't even have to have solutions, but just discuss things and give you strength. And out of that dialogue, solutions can come up. Second thing. Third thing, think locally, see what you can do directly in your own patch that gives you joy. You feel, yes, I'm planting a tree. Yes, I've cut down my electricity bills. Yes, I've stopped eating so much meat. I've done something positive. So you keep, you know, you're doing something practical, but also something that keeps your spirits alive. So those are the three things I'd suggest.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you so much for coming to this afternoon.
Okay,
it's lovely.
great.
Thank you.
Be well. Take care. Yeah, I have to leave now. Thanks very much for inviting me this afternoon.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye. Bye, Geshe. Bye, Colin.
Bye. Thank you.
Geshe, would you have the three things?
Three things. Okay.
Yeah.
It has to be three or can also be four? Or
You can be, yes, there can be more.
Okay, so three. Yeah, I mean, basically, following these kind of systems we just talked about, of developing aspects of compassion, right, for others. That, you know, first of all, there's kind of self-awareness, then self-compassion, and then compassion for others, right? And that self-awareness can also, and self-compassion also can be an answer to the question just asked before. That can be a solution to anxiety and fear as well. Yeah, if you understand the problems we are facing, and certain problems or certain issues we can deal with or we can solve. So we should solve and deal with it and don't worry about too much. And other issues is beyond our capacity, there is no need to fear and anxiety because we cannot change that situation anyway. So there's a kind of mental attitude towards those aspects of problems we are facing. And then of course, then the last one is to have compassion for others, right? Just as Venerable said, that, you know, if you communicate things more with other people and of course don't get things more in a constructive way based on this kind of mental attitudes, then we can build a better future. Yeah, so, but we have to have this kind of mental states of awareness and self-compassion, make sure we strengthen and we put our feet on the ground, and then look for, you know, there's a lot of positive things we can do ourselves, and then bring it in a bigger kind of picture or platform, and then move it outwards. So that's, yeah, maybe 3: awareness, self-compassion, and compassion for others.
Thank you. Colin?
Oh, do what wiser people than me have told you to do.
Thank you, Colin. I think that really sort of draws us to the end of today. But I think the real thing is the answer lies with us, doesn't it? You know, if you can do a bit of Buddhist practice and you can find that quietness in your own heart, that quietness and stillness, then the sense of meaning will arise, and out of that comes a sense of responsibility too, and you start to feel for other people. You also start to feel for the sentient world. You don't feel so keen to take an axe to a tree, you know, you have a feeling for other things, and it just arises naturally and spontaneously. It's been a wonderful afternoon, and very enjoyable speakers, and thank you very, very much, Colin, for organizing this and getting it together and getting us all, you know, keyed up for today. And yes, the unruly members of the of our audience as well, getting us all together. Thank you. Been very, very stimulating and helpful. And I really hope it's planted a seed too, that people can grow from this, and people will take some of those important things, you know, on board, and that we will talk about these things and put some of them into action, and that change can take place. It certainly needs to. So would anybody else like to have a last word? Geshe, would you like to say something?
So yeah, thank you, Desmond, for organizing, and also Colin for being the main fuel behind this. And yeah, I hope people can take something home and share it with others, because yeah, that's the only way we can move forward to put it in a bigger picture. So thank you very much for everybody for
Good,
coming.
thank you. Well, audience, thank you very, very much for coming and attending, and look forward very much to seeing you again in our next Zoom meeting. And perhaps we can all get together again and discuss this topic again at some point in the future. It'd be very nice. Thank you all.